The next question comes from Gary Nunn.
Are euphemisms always dangerous? The ones that we use for death are comforting, but they create a taboo. Prime Minister Abbott's obsessive use of the term death cult to describe Islamic State may be ill-advised, but isn't his bluntness here better than some of the euphemisms that conceal the uncomfortable truths?
The question was about the bluntness, whether it's better to be blunt and refer to something as a death cult than use some other kind of euphemism to describe it.
Well, I don't want to be prescriptive and say euphemism is always bad. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good. I mean, even talking about this whole issue with families. Yeah, you want the grown-ups to be able to face death. Do you want the 6-year-olds to be there or not? I mean, these are questions you want to... Okay.
Yes, that's what I...
Yeah, I'd have to think about that. I mean, sometimes I think I'd want to see... I think it could be just too overwhelming for kids sometimes. But maybe that's just because I've been raised in this industrialized version of it.
Take it back to the question, which was about the use of death cult to describe Islamic State or ISIS. What do you think about the psychology of terrorism in that regard? Because, as Caitlin was just saying, the death cult sort of fetishizes the idea to such a degree that it might, in fact, be attractive to some young people.
Yeah, I mean, it might fetishize it. Well, it's not a celebration of life. It's not. It does seem to have to do with death, for sure. I mean, just structurally, if you look at what ISIS is about, there's a heavy, heavy emphasis on the afterlife. And when you have a religion, this is something Nietzsche, the philosopher, pointed out, that heavily emphasizes the afterlife, it tends to minimize the here and now to some degree, which makes the idea of martyrdom less onerous or frightening. And it makes the idea of taking someone else's life in some ways less disturbing. And of course, there is a lot of talk about death. Now, is it a cult? ISIS has got mass movement qualities about it. It certainly, it has native people who are attracted to it, in Syria and Iraq, and it has people here, many of whom, I can at least speak from the Canadian experience, are very troubled people who, like many people who join cults or mass movements, are often young people, young men, who feel their lives have been a failure, and they are trying to, in a way, erase their current self by joining a cult which tells them how to live, or a mass movement, which tends to have spectacles and rituals that have to do with death to create awe in the young people. So, I mean, there are cultish qualities. There have been cults that are violent, but a lot of them aren't violent. I'd have to understand the context that the Prime Minister is using it in to know. But there is something trance-like about ISIS, the use of drugs, propaganda, not letting people stray from it or at pain of death.
Let's hear from Mohsin's written, obviously, about Islamic extremism at different times, fundamentalism. What are your thoughts on whether ISIS is or is not a death cult?
I mean, I don't really. Well, a few things. First of all, I don't know any more about ISIS than anybody else in this room. Also, I think that sometimes we get caught up in these words, death cult, and I'm a writer, so words are my profession. But to me, it's more interesting. What are we actually talking about? What's underneath this? And I think that there are a couple of big sources of the appeal of something like ISIS, I would imagine. And I often think that one of the ways of imagining this is what would convince you to join something like this. Put yourself in the shoes of somebody who goes and joins. What might make you feel that way? Yeah,
I probably wouldn't think a video of people beheading other people would be a good advertisement, for example, but it appears to be.
Let's break our market, since it's a marketing exercise. These videos are basically a kind of marketing exercise. Let's break our market into different segments. There is perhaps a psychopathic segment for whom the idea of being invited to behead people is attractive, just as an opportunity to behead people. Then there is perhaps a group of people who are exactly as you were saying. I think as young people, particularly young men, throughout history have had this desire to go out and slay dragons, to be heroes.